Thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll be talking about the new product releases from Altmetric. So just a bit of introduction. My name is Emma Proudley. I'm the product manager for customer onboarding here at Altmetric, and I'm joined by Sara Grimme, who's the director of strategic accounts at Digital Science. So what we'll cover today, we'll mention a little bit of housekeeping for the presentation. For those who aren't familiar with Altmetrics and Altmetric, the company, I'll just do a bit of explanation of what it is we do and what we're talking about. Then we'll get into what the new product releases from Altmetric. Sara will show us a demo, and then we've got time afterwards for questions and answers. So for housekeeping, just so everyone's aware, the webinar is being recorded. Registrants will all receive a link to the recording tomorrow. All attendees are currently muted. So if there's any technical issues, send the host a private chat for assistance. And if you have questions at the end, type them into the chat box and we'll be able to address those. So first of all, I'm going to go back to the basics and discuss exactly what it is I'm talking about when I talk about Altmetrics and Altmetric. So essentially, Altmetric tracks attention that a research output, such as a scholarly article or a book or a data set, receives online. This attention is called the Altmetrics. So we pull data from social media sites, news articles, blogs, policy documents, etc. And we are for anybody who is interested in the dissemination of scholarly research, whether that be researchers, authors of research, anybody working at a publisher or a library, and even the general public. So just a bit of terminology first. It's very easy to default to calling everything an article, but articles are not the only type of research products, and they're not the only type of research product that we track. We also track and include other items such as books, data sets, articles, any kind of thing like that. So we don't just track articles, we track all sorts of outputs. So that's what I'm referring to when I say an output. When we talk about Altmetric mentions, we're talking about a share or a reference to or an engagement with a research output. An example of this would be a tweet on Twitter or a blog post. And finally, when we talk about the attention source, this is the platform on which these Altmetric mentions are happening and where research is being shared. So this would be a news outlet, a social media site such as Twitter or a blog. So what are Altmetrics? So Altmetrics are indicators of non-traditional attention and engagement with digitally published research and scholarship. That's a mouthful. So Altmetrics stands for alternative metrics. These are because they're alternative to traditional citation-based metrics. When used complementarily with citation-based metrics, they tell a broader story and allow you to see in a faster time what kind of engagement your research or your journal's articles are receiving. So a big strength of Altmetrics is the speed of which you can see the results. So in most cases, Altmetrics is immediate. So you'll see quick feedback quicker than with traditional metrics. This is really great if you are an early career researcher or if you have a new journal. That's because it takes a long time to publish papers and a long time for citations to accrue. Altmetrics offers you the opportunity to understand the engagement with your papers and your research a lot faster. So with how could you answer some of these questions, such as finding out who is engaging with your journals the most, how can you make sure you're reaching the right people, and how do you inform communication strategies to make sure you're targeting the right areas? Well, you can answer all of these questions with the Altmetric Explorer, and within that, our new feature, which is the Mention Sources tab. So the Altmetric Explorer is a web-based platform. It enables users to browse and report on all attention data for every scholarly output that we've found attention for. So this is over 14 million research outputs to date. That's our full Altmetric database. So you will have access to the full Altmetric database with the Explorer. And within the Explorer is our new feature, which is the Mention Sources tab. And I'll just tell you a little bit about our new feature now, and then we'll go into the demo. So with the new Mention Sources tab, it'll allow you to see exactly which sources and people are mentioning your journal's articles the most. So having this information on who's engaging with your journal's research, it can help with such things like building your professional networks, building your editorial boards. You can benchmark engagement, performance, and successes. You can also shape more effective communication strategies, for example. So the Mention Sources tab can be located within the Explorer. You can view the top mentioned sources on the highlights page, or you can go into more detail by clicking the Mention Sources tab up the top. With the Mention Sources tab, you can actually filter by attention source. So in this view here, you can see I've filtered by Twitter, but you can also filter by other attention sources such as news, policy, blogs, and social media, such as Facebook as well. And you can use this to filter by any search you have at the top. So up the top, you can see my search here is for outputs published in scientific reports, but you can apply the Mention Sources view to any search that you have. You can also filter by specific date ranges or countries. So this allows you to see the top attention sources by region. So you can see here I have a filter for United States, but you can enter many different countries in there. So if you're using Altmetric data to analyze the audiences of your journal or assess your own outreach efforts, the Mention Sources tab can help you answer questions like who are the most influential tweeters or bloggers in your journal's field. You can also use this to compare what your competition is doing, so you can see what other journals are the people engaging with your journal, what other journals are they reading. You can look at how you can improve your communication strategy and look at which press outlets you should be targeting and in which countries. So if you're joining us from a publisher marketing background and you might like to explore the audience around a particular journal, article, or a topic that your journal is working on, looking at which tweeters have been sharing and discussing your content and that of others, such as your competitors' journals, it can help you inform your market activity. It can also help you inform future plans and find out who and where you should be targeting next. So you can use the information as evidence of success. So you can look at what you've been successful doing, and you can use this to report evidence of success to key stakeholders, or you can replicate successful strategies for the future. So we'll go into the demo now. So I'll hand you over to Sara.
Hello, everyone. We're just changing seats in our little room in London. Okay. So what I'm going to do on the demo is actually go back to the basics a little bit, because I'm not sure how many of you are overly familiar with Altmetric Explorer. Just a bit of background on me. I used to be a publisher. I worked at Nature when it was still Nature, and launched the journal Scientific Reports, which some of you may have heard of, and then went to Elsevier. And when I was there, I started my career there with the neuroscience team, and I ran 15 neuroscience journals, and then I launched their mega journal because I'm a sucker for punishment and I like mega journals. So some of what I'm going to show you today actually uses the journals that I worked on, my examples, because I think it's always nice to see something real. Okay, so what you see in front of you is the Altmetric Explorer. For any of you that have an account, obviously you'll be very familiar with this, but I think that there'll be some of you who won't have seen it. So please bear with me while we go through this. So what you've got here is a couple of different tabs or different ways that you can look at the data. The first thing you see here is your highlights tab, and this is exactly what it says it is. It's the highlights. Now, if I had a search term in here, or if I put a search term up here, this would of course relate to my search term, but right now this relates to everything that's ever been published that we can track attention to. So if you're interested in the highest attentioned article of all time, there it is right there. And what you'll sometimes see here is there tends to be lots of papers from Nature and the Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine here, but it can be quite fun just to look at what the most attention-worthy articles are. Okay, so what we'll do, because I'll go through these as we search, but I'm going to start by actually doing a search. Okay, so here's my search. You'll see that there's lots of different ways that I can actually search for information. Most of it's free text-based, but some of it will actually expose preset lists. So what I want to do in my search is I'm going to search for the sustainability goals, because I think we all know how hot these are at the moment. Now, if I wanted to, what I could do here is I could actually put in a parent term, so a higher term of classification, which would basically say, I want to look at everything published on the sustainability goals within the fields of environmental sciences. So if I type for environmental sciences, what I see in my drop-down list is there we go. I could put that in and that would become part of my search. I'm not going to do that. I want to see everything. But what I could also do is type in an organization. So I could do Harvard. And there we go, Harvard would come up. So there's lots of different ways I could search here. Now, if I know what it is I'm looking for, I can simply put it in there, and whether it's a book or an article, it will appear. I can look at the type of output. In this case, I want to see everything, but if I only wanted to see articles, I could, or I could just look at books. I can also just do open access if I want to, or ORCIDs, or I could use a PubMed query. And then along here, I can also do publishers, journals, and collections. Now, in this case right now, I'm going to ignore this, but I will come back to this momentarily. And just here, you can also see a publication date, but I'm gonna ignore that as well. And I'm gonna run my search. So what I see here is all of the attention, essentially, that is present on the sustainability goals in the scientific discourse. There's 36,663 total mentions, and they will be across Twitter and Wikipedia and news articles and policy documents and lots of other things. I can see here exactly what those research outputs are, and by research output we mean journal or article, or book. In this case, no surprise, sustainability goals, a lot of it's coming from the Lancet, but you can really see how high the Altmetric scores are, and you can click through to those. Now, it's worth noting this actually sorts by the score, but what I might actually want to do is look at publication date. And what I'd be curious to see here is if my field of research, if I'm still a journals publisher and I'm actually looking to see where the hot attention is going, because I think some of it should be going to my journal, what this is going to tell me is where the competition is, essentially. If I really think I should be getting the contact that's getting news attention and it's not, this is telling me what is getting news attention. Now, I can also look at the timeline, and the timeline's kind of cool because I can play around with it. So what I can do here, this goes back to 2002, but in this case, I actually just want to look at the last couple of years. So what I can actually do there is see, for example, where there were spikes, what was actually causing those spikes. And in this case, there was something going on that got a lot of attention on Twitter and quite a few news mentions as well. So this view is particularly good when you're looking at a specific journal, which we will do shortly. I can also look at demographics, so I can see what is getting attention from where. In this case, I can break that down by Twitter, Facebook, news, and policy. As someone who published a mega journal, we always were most interested in the news. That was what was a really, really big deal for us, because that was how we knew that people were seeing the journal. And funnily enough, we always loved it when we made, for example, the Daily Mail, because it really just showed that we were publishing fun and interesting science. So what we see here, for example, is within this field of research, we're seeing a lot coming from the US, a lot coming from the UK, and also quite a bit coming from India, Australia, and different parts of Europe. So if I'm thinking about where I'm going to market my journal that's got something to do with the sustainability goals, what I can actually see here is where attention is coming from, and these markets might be the places where I want to focus. Now, what some of you might not be overly familiar with, but I want to touch on, is policy documents. I think policy documents are absolutely fantastic, because one of the things we're hearing researchers and funders talk more about is the societal impact of research. And what policy does fantastically well is actually show the impact that the research that we publish has on society. Now, in this case, with the policy documents, you can see there are 268 policy documents. We've got 23 policy sources in 10 countries that actually mention the sustainability goals. Now, if we looked at a different search term, if we looked at gender studies or women's health or education, for example, education's a big one, what you'll actually often see with policy is policy being linked back to articles that were published 15 to 20 years ago, and the same with books actually. Monographs have an incredibly longevity in terms of their policy mentions. So play around with the policy documents for those of you who have the Explorer, because this is something that I think that we underuse and is really important at showing researchers the impact of what they publish. Next is the mentions, and this is exactly what it says it is. So this is for each of the articles that have attention within sustainability goals, what the latest mentions are. I haven't put any time frame on there, but I can if I want to, and I could also look for countries. I'm not that interested in doing that right now because I'm just showing you for illustrative purposes, but if you specifically want to look at what's being done, what's being said in the US or what's being said in Australia or whatever, you can very easily drill down on your search. Now, the mention sources that Emma was talking about, these are very cool because what you can actually see here is who the influencers are. If I'm just launching a journal, or if my journal is quite old and maybe not doing so well, not getting as much attention as I think it should, this is a really good way for me to actually work out who's having influence. Who is it that is actually talking about research in this field? Do I know them? Should I know them? Should these be people that I actually try to get in touch with or try and target their lists? So what I can see here is the people who are talking about the sustainability goals, but I can also see the number of followers they have. If someone's got 150 mentions, but they've only got 3 followers, well, they're kind of interesting, but I'm not going to spend much time on them. What I'm really interested in is the people who are tweeting a lot, but who have a lot of followers, because these are the people that have influence. And for example, we've got some people here. These guys here, I would be incredibly interested in actually looking into who these individuals are, because they have a lot of followers. And it may be that they're someone that we want to get involved in the journal. It may be that they're someone that we would like to meet at a conference, or if they're very subject specific, we might want to commission a book with, or anything like that. But essentially what this is telling you is these are the people who are really having a voice in this conversation. I mean, The Lancet, not surprisingly, has a phenomenal amount of followers, but if you can get picked up by The Lancet, you're going to actually get attention from a tremendous number of people. So it's really worth playing around with the mention sources and seeing if there's an opportunity to engage with any of these individuals. Now, the other thing here that I really like is the Journals tab, because that's actually going to enable me to compare myself to everyone else. For example, that my journal is, I can only dream of it being Nature or The Lancet. Okay, let's say I'm the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. I'm probably quite a niche journal, but even though I'm niche, I'm actually still getting a little bit of attention, which is fantastic. It's mostly coming from Twitter, which is fine, but I might actually be interested in considering how I can publish more content that does get more buzz. So what I might want to do is actually look at the journals that are getting a lot of attention. Now, in this case, they're not going to be that applicable because I was looking at a tourism journal, and what we see mostly here is, for example, the Lancet or Sustainability Science or the Lancet Global Health. But what this is doing, nonetheless, is giving me a sense of what other journals in my field are doing and how much attention that they're getting. So that gives me a bit of a benchmark, and I know where I should be aiming. And what I can also do, for example, if there's another niche journal here, for example, let me see, environmental research letters, what I might actually want to do, because they get a lot of attention for a fairly niche journal, I might actually want to open that up, take a look at them, and then go to their website and see what it is that they're doing well. So what this should start to do is give you an idea of how you can look at the noise that your journal is getting and how that compares to other journals. Now, what we can also do here is change the date range. We can do exports and we can save. So I'm not going to do it right now because I'm on Emma's computer, but if I was on mine and this was a search I wanted to keep running, what I could actually do is just download the results. I could open them in the API, or I could save the search and then I can keep running it as much as I want. In this case, I'm done with my search. What I want to do now is actually show you a journal collection. I'm going to do scientific reports, which gets lots of interesting attention. Okay, so what I want to actually do here is just go straight to my mentioned sources, because what I'm curious to know is who are my influencers. Now, the journal, since its very early days, has always had a strong Twitter presence, so I'm going to ignore that. But I can see here our other top Twitter followers or tweeters, and I can also see those with a lot of followers. Now, this one here in particular, I took a look at this earlier. I will admit I cheated a little, and what I can see is this individual has a huge number of followers and they look really, really relevant. And I looked at this person's Twitter feed and the feed looks really relevant as well. If I scroll down, I've got some others that also have a huge number of followers. And if I was still running the journal, which sadly I'm not, but what I might actually try and do is reach out to these people and see what it is that attracts them to the content, understand why they're tweeting a lot, see how influential they are, and just potentially, if we can, just engage further with them. What I can also do, so Scientific Reports is cheating a little bit because it's a very big journal and it gets a lot of attention, but I can actually do the same thing with a niche journal. So I'm again going to take a journal that I used to work on, which is Neuropsycho. I've got to be able to spell it. Pharmacology. This was a great journal with Elsevier. Well, still is a great journal. Okay, so what I can see with this journal as well is, even though it is very niche, it is also still getting a lot of attention. And what I can do is actually, again, look at where that attention's coming from. And in this case, because the journal's pretty niche, in some ways this might be more relevant because the people who are tweeting about it a lot are tweeting to that specific audience. So it's really worth playing around with this for your journal and getting a sense of how you can actually use this information to be a little bit more targeted in some of what you do. Now, what we can also do, if I want to stick with neuropsychopharmacology, what I'm curious to do is just have a look at how my journal's doing compared to other journals. So if I go to the Highlights tab, I haven't put in a date range. So this is the total mentions for all time. And this is showing me the number of outputs. So this means the number of articles that have attention, and then the total number of articles that Altmetric is tracking. These are the journals that have had the articles that have had the most attention. And if I was still working on the journal, what I'd be curious to see is, well, firstly, is there a particular theme? Do I see quite a bit of attention going to one particular thing that I might want to turn into a special issue down the line? Or did we do a special issue that's getting a lot of attention that we could look at again? Now, if I go to see all research outputs, this is going to give me the full list. I had previously searched by publication date, so that's what it's defaulted to. But what I'm going to do is change that to highest first. And what I'm curious to see here in particular is, are there clusters of years and topics that get a lot of attention? Now, in this case, there's not, it's quite fragmented. So what I might want to do is go up here, edit my search and change my publication date. And then what I can actually do is just look at, for example, the last 2 years. So I want to go between then and today, run that again, and now I can see over the last 2 years what's had the most impact. I don't see anything particular that's coming out to me as this is a special issue area, but in a different subject area, quite possibly it could, or if I actually spend more time looking at this. But what I might want to do with this is give this straight to my marketing person and say, hey, marketing person, can you run a campaign on all of this? Because what this is showing right off the bat is if you publish in my journal, your article is actually going to get a lot of attention. And it's really important for authors, for potential authors, to know that they are going to get attention because, of course, they need to get visibility and they need to get people reading their work. So look at this and think about how you can use it to draw more attention, and also to put this stuff on Twitter and to actually show, hey, look, this article that we published, it got mentioned by all of these different news sources, for example. So if we actually open this one, what we can see here is it got attention from a number of different sources, but particularly the news, it got a lot of news attention. This is really, really powerful, and this is really important to showcase to the researchers that choose to publish with our journals. They need to know that their work has this wide-reaching impact. Okay, so the other thing I can show you for neuropsychopharmacology is the timeline. Now, I've set this to a 2-year field, so this is what it's showing me. Again, what I might want to do is just look at the peaks here and see, was it for any particular reason, and is there anything that we can learn or that we might want to revisit? I'd be curious to know what we published in May 2019 and what we published in February 2019 and why it got so much news and blogging attention. Looks like something interesting from a news perspective happened in 2018 as well. And what I can also do, for example, is if I could just click on that, I can actually see how the news, just news, tracks over that timeline as well. Okay, what is next? So in this case, we don't have any policy documents, but that's okay. It just hasn't come up for this particular field or this journal. What I do want to actually do is look at the demographics. I want to see where my attention's coming from. Now, what I think I'll have to do here is remove this. I just want my journal, run my search. There we go, I've got my demographics. So I can see for Twitter, I'm getting pretty universal coverage, but I'm getting a particularly large amount from the US and Canada. Again, Northern Europe and Australia. I can also do the same for Facebook and for news. And here are my policy documents. So I can see that my journal has actually had policy implications in Australia, in the UK, in Germany, a little bit in Switzerland and the Netherlands, but significantly in the US. And this is something that I would really be talking about a lot because I think that the policy citations are fantastic and you should all just play around with them and use them more. I can also look at the mentions. I've already showed you the mentioned sources. You're not going to see anything for journals because I'm just looking at one journal. But the cool thing about the journals is I'm just looking at my journal, but if I was actually a competitor to this journal, what this is doing is actually showing me how the competition's doing. So if I was working for the journal Neuroscience, I could just put that in. I could just use this search that I've just run to look at one of my key competitor journals and see how they're doing compared to how I'm doing. Okay, so the other thing I quickly want to do is just do a book search to show you how this works for books. I'm going to get rid of my journal because I don't need it. And I am going to search for epidemiology. I'm not going to put any subjects for classification in, and I want to specifically look at books and book chapters. Okay, just need to give this a moment longer. Bear with us. Right, so what we have here is the most prolifically, what would you call attentioned? Is that the right phrase?
I guess so. The most prolifically mentioned. Yeah.
Beautiful, that works. The most prolifically mentioned in the field of epidemiology, and what you see there is it gets a huge number of news mentions. You can see that it's been mentioned significantly by the World Health Organization, by an institute in the Netherlands that I'm not going to try and pronounce, and the CIDC. You can also see that because this is a generic subject search, you can see the top journals and collections featuring it, the top affiliations, the top subject areas, and the news highlights and mentions. If I go down here, I can also see attention by region for this search and the distribution of altmetric attention. So there's lots that I can do here. What I specifically want to do is actually look at all of the books that have been published. So I want to see all of the research outputs. Now there's a lot of them, so this is clearly not going to show me that many. I would need to export it to see everything. Just bear with us. It's a shame we don't have any hold music for our search. We might just try another tab. Nope, looks like our slightly dodgy internet has failed on us. If you could just bear with us. Actually, while this is going, we can just see if anyone has any questions. We don't have any questions, but I do think we might have a problem with either our internet or the Explorer. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're back. It doesn't look like the research outputs are going to load, but if I go back to the highlights, what I quickly just wanted to show you is where you have your outputs, and if they tend to cluster around a specific publisher, one of the key things I think you can do here is actually give this information to your salespeople. So for example, this book here, if I was the publisher of this, or this one, actually any of these, what I'd want to know is, are these books on our sales lists? Do our sales team know about them, and are they mentioning them to institutes when they go and visit? Because I think this is a fantastic demonstration of the importance of some of these books. And these are the things where if I'm a salesperson and I'm going to an institute that I know has a big epidemiology program, I want to know that these textbooks or these books are in front of them as books to be purchased. So it's just something to think about as well, how you can use these in a sales environment. We can't see the research outputs. We can see the timeline. I don't want to see all the timeline. It's not relevant. I just want to squidge that along for the last few years. And what I can actually see is some really key periods where certain epidemiology books got a huge amount of attention. What I also want to do here is I want to look at policy documents. Policy and books go hand in hand, in my personal opinion. Others may disagree, but any of you who are on the line who are commissioning editors or working in books in any way, if any of you ever hear that it's not worth people's time to publish monographs, they're wrong. What we often see with monographs and attention is that monographs continue to get attention years into the future after publication, particularly with policy documents. Now, I'm looking at a very broad subject level search, but if I was looking at some of these books, if I go back to my highlights tab that have a huge amount of attention. So for example, let's take this textbook. What I can actually see, so this was published in 2011. Is it still getting attention? Let's see. Yep, this book got attention 6 years after publication. It was cited in news articles 6 years after publication. So this is a textbook that long after publication is still getting a huge amount of attention. And the best way to actually understand that and to see that is using the Altmetric Explorer. So you can also do that via the mentions. You can see who is looking at this information and why. And if I go back to my mentioned sources, what I see is exactly what I would want to see, which is books to do with epidemiology are actually getting a lot of mentions or attention from the right organisations that should be looking at them. So what I'm seeing here is that if I'm publishing the right kinds of content, it's going to be viewed by the right kinds of organisations. Now, I've done this on the subject. Again, I could do it on specific books if I wanted to. I could put in a list of ISBNs. In this case, I'm not going to because I'm a little bit worried about time. But that is, in a nutshell, a whistle-stop tour of the Explorer. Do we have any questions, or is there anything that I've missed that you'd like to add, Emma?
No, I think it's a very comprehensive cover. Apologies if our connection meant we had some sound troubles there, but if you have any questions, just pop them in the question and answer box.
It looks like we have one here. Have you considered including sentiment insights along with mentions as a tool to understanding how people are reacting to the research output?
This isn't something in our current product timeline, but it's actually interesting. I've not heard that as a suggestion, but so no, we haven't, but probably something
to think about.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good question.
Any other questions for the chat? Yes, okay, one more. Could you please specify what we put behind the policy documents? What kind of documents are there?
So we have a feed of all sorts of policy documents that we gather through. When we get new customers, they supply us with policy document suggestions, and we get them from various different countries. I mean, there are thousands there, but you can find this information on our website. Also, if you have questions about specific policy documents, you can always send an email to support@Altmetric, and we'd be able to give you some more details there. The way we track mentions within these policy documents is via text mining. So we'll look at the name of the journal and the article that's mentioned in the citations and track the mentions that way.
And actually, one thing I'll say about the policy documents is most of the big ones are there.
Yeah.
The stuff you would expect, the World WHO, the UN, the World Bank,
the British standards, I think.
Yeah, all of the big ones tend to be there. Any other questions? I think we can probably wrap up because we're not seeing anything else.
Great. So I'll just finish by saying that if you do ever have questions, please contact us, support@Altmetric. There's somebody available there to answer your questions or direct you to the right person. All from everybody. Happy exploring.
And enjoy the new mentions tab.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.